YouTube, what's up? I haven't made a video on this channel for at least 6 months, if not longer. This side channel I have was sort of a just means for venting and trying to just talk about random stuff and babble on and on and on. And there hasn't been anything really going on that interesting for me to babble on about. However, those who don't know, yesterday, the 12th of November, 2018, something huge and hugely upsetting happened. Those who have been away from social media or the news or have been living under a rock or just not connected in general may not know, so I'll go ahead and tell you now. Stan Lee passed away. Those who don't know who he was, if you've ever watched a huge blockbuster comic book movie that comes out every summer, if you've ever picked up a comic book, if you've ever watched a TV show where they're talking about comic book characters, if you've been in any way, shape, or form connected to, quote, nerd culture at all in your lifetime, and you've gained some pleasure out of that sort of stuff, you probably owe it to Stan Lee. You could probably chalk it up to something influenced by something that he created out of his head back in the 60s. Stan Lee was responsible for creating many of the Marvel characters that have gone on to become massive pop culture icons. From Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Incredible Hulk, all the villains that are associated with those characters, and the list goes on and on and on. Marvel Comics was birthed from Stan Lee and a couple other creators' visions. Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko. Excuse me, I can't talk straight. So yeah, he was 95 years old and he passed away. Those who pay attention at all to this sort of stuff know that over the last handful of years, he's had a bit of a rough go of it. His wife passed away last year previously. He's had some health issues. That's to be expected with being in your 90s. So it's not like it's a sudden death. It's not like it's not something that has been in people's minds for the last couple years now, that being in your 90s, you don't really have a lot of time to play around with, but that doesn't make it any better. And for those saying like, oh, he was old, what did you expect? Oh, he was, in his 90s, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal, and it's a massive, massive loss. It's impactful for so many people. Personally, myself, comic books were the first thing that I gravitated toward as a kid when I was learning to read. And from the time I could hold a comic book in my hand and all the way into my 30s and my adult life now, I've been reading comics, collecting comics. I've been fascinated and entertained and very much have sculpted my personality and my values and my life based on some of the creations, most of the creations of Stan Lee. I grew up, me and my good friend Alex would ride our bikes over to the comic book store that was, not too far from our neighborhood and dig through boxes and pick up comics from 19-cent boxes, where it's 19 cents per comic. And we would do that every chance we got and just fill long boxes full of books and, just read and talk about all of these different superheroes and their powers and how cool they are and all that stuff. Before that, I would watch the animated Marvel shows, Spider-Man and X-Men on Fox when I was very young, and watching those shows, which directly adapted a lot of the comic book stories from the 80s primarily, all that stuff wouldn't have existed if Stan Lee didn't think about them first and create them with Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Bill Everett, I believe, in the case of Daredevil. Yeah, so it's one of those things that, like, from the moment I could take in the media, from the moment I was able to process and, like, have the independent thought in my head of this is what I'm all about, this is my life, this is what I like, it was always X-Men, Spider-Man, Marvel Comics specifically, and other comics and stuff like that too, but Marvel was always my go-to. And back when I was a kid, you didn't, like, advertise you were in the comics or you were into, you know, these cartoons based on these comics, because it was looked at as nerdy and looked at as something that would get people made fun of. But, like, among my group of friends that were into it, it was like religion to us, and it has very much become a religion to me. The lessons and things that you read in books like Spider-Man and the X-Men, and the messages that they give the youth and adults and everybody, literally everybody, are valuable and are, like, what I've modeled my entire life after. You know, to the point where, like, I loved comic books as a kid, so I would sit and read comics, and then I would grab a notebook and pencil, and I would look at the pictures in the comics, and then I would sketch and, like, try to replicate, and I learned how to draw and make art that way from reading comic books. And now, you know, by the time I was 21, 22, I got thrown into a career where I now, for a living, look at things, sketch things out, and draw things onto people. And I don't feel like I would have had my career as a tattooer without the comic books and those characters and all that sort of stuff. I have on my thigh, it's like 18, 20 inches long from my knee to, like, my waist, a big, gigantic Spider-Man tattoo. Spider-Man's my favorite character in fiction ever. Of course, my favorite comic book character. And that part of me that, like, I get so much joy and happiness out of Spider-Man and the comics and the movies and the cartoons and all the various media, the video games, the game that just came out, you know, earlier this year on PlayStation 4, I bought immediately, or acquired immediately, and played the shit out of. And it's all thanks to Stan Lee. I don't know what else to say. Like, he was this giant personality in addition to his creations that was like a living, breathing part in life for so many people. Yeah, it's tough, man. It's like there hasn't been a death that has affected me like this since my own grandfather died. And for Stan Lee to pass away, it feels like losing an influence like grandfather, like this guy that's just been around your whole life and who has either directly influenced you or what they've done has influenced you growing up. And you learn so much and you take so many lessons away from what they've done, and it shapes you and molds you like a grandfather does to a young child who, you know, is always there to teach that lesson, that grandpa wisdom. Stanley was kind of like that for a lot of people. I mean, I know everybody's going to talk about the movie cameos and how much fun it was to spot him and pick him out in these little scenes in all these Marvel movies over the last, like, 15 years or so, almost 20 years now. And, like, those will be sorely missed. But the on the positive end of it, he lived a long and fruitful and prosperous life and gave so much to so many people. And for all of the accomplishments in his life, he will go on to be remembered and revered as one of the utmost important figures and the most important storytellers in the history of mankind, let alone, maybe the most important storyteller of the past century. So it's hard to think of a world where he's not around, but every time, you walk through the mall and you see a young kid wearing a Spider-Man shirt, or every time you go to the movies and you see a trailer for Avengers 10 or whatever, or Spider-Man whatever, or whatever random, not very well adapted X-Men movies coming up next, it's gonna like affect you without knowing it. And for that, the legend, the persona, the absolute genius of creativity that Stan Lee was will never die. That's all I got, man. I don't want to get all choked up and shit on a YouTube video, but here we are. Yeah, that's about all I got. For those of you who are true believers, as Stan would refer to us, I'm sorry for all of our losses. But, we move on and we will live to enjoy all of his creations another day. And I don't think there will ever be another Stan Lee, but the fact that so many people are out there trying to be because of what he did is super meaningful and super substantial and amazing to me. So I guess that's it. And to quote the man himself, Excelsior. That's all I've got.